He was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from abnormal swelling of his body. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him on his way. Then he asked them, "If one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out?" And they had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honour at the table, he told them this parable. "When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honour, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, 'Give this person your seat.' Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, 'Friend, move up to a better place.' Then you will be honoured in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives or your rich neighbours. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous."
The title for this morning, it's a long one. Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. I like to take credit for that in my pride, but actually it was N.T. Wright, Bishop Tom Wright, who said those words. Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. Paddleboarding later on today. Some of you have heard about my first experience ever of paddleboarding when, about 3 or 4 years ago, Kate and myself and our 3 adult children went to the paddleboard school on the beach. And I wanted to go on my own, if I'm honest. I didn't tell them this because I thought I'd be brilliant, and the 3 of them, 4 of them would hold me back. That's me being really honest. And I thought very humbly, I will go with them, and because it would be a nice family thing to do, and I'll just kind of hold back and stay with them and all that kind of thing. So we all had the boards on the beach. I had my shades on, and the instructor said, "I'll take them off if I was you because you might lose them." And I said, "No, I'm okay." And we all went out in the water, and we all tried to stand up. 4 out of the 5 were successful, 1 wasn't, guess who? And I fell in straight away, and my sunglasses went to the bottom of the sea. And for the next hour, well, half an hour for me, we were going out towards the pier, and all 4 of my family were doing amazingly, moving up and down the board, really annoying things like that, and turning around at the back and turning the board round. And I could not even stand up on the board. I couldn't even kneel. And then, as I'm prone to do out at sea in ships, I got seasick. And my last memory of being out there was standing up on the paddleboard, just falling in straight away, throwing up as I fell in, ending up in the water, and the instructor saying, "I better tow you back in, they can stay out here." Pride comes before a fall, and in my case, many, many, many falls. The church, a few years ago now, and they're still online, we looked at a tool called the Enneagram, and it's a personality tool, an ancient personality tool that many people within churches are finding useful, really helpful actually, the in-depth work, and people who have different faith or no faith as well are finding it really helpful. And it's based on 9 personality types. We will all identify, if we're self-aware and can identify with one particular of these types. The type 2 is called the helper. And with this person, their whole life actually, and this is from young and throughout their life, is often trying to help other people, and they'll be very good at spotting other people's needs, getting alongside. They'll often be very warm people, and they are literally very, very helpful. The thing is that in each of these personality types, there's also what's called a vice and a virtue. The vice is like a bit of a deadly sin, which is something which isn't healthy for the person. And the virtue is something, if they work towards that, they can be a healthier type of that number, a type 2. So for the helper, the Enneagram type 2, the vice is pride. And pride can be with anybody, any type number, but in particular with the type 2. And there can be pride in terms of being able to help, being able to spot other people's needs, to be that person that people rely on. And it sounds very obvious, but it's all very subtle. And often the helper doesn't know some of their motivation for all their help. It can be pride. And for their growth, it's actually moving to that place where any help is coming from a healthier place, a place of genuine humility. I took ages to identify what number, what type I could identify with, and it turned out it was the type 2. I really did not want to be the type 2 who had pride as their deadly sin, but actually that was me. The thing that put me off was that helpers, type 2s, find it really hard to ask for help. Really, really hard to ask for help. And it put me off because I have, since being a kid, found it easy to ask for help. Going to the teacher and wanting to be teacher's pet, but going to the teacher, a particular teacher, asking for help. But for me, as I look back, it was because of desperation. So that pride was there, that resistance to help was there, but each time when I sought help, it was through desperation. So when I had an I had a great image at school, and I was very popular, and I was in the band, and I was doing the sport, I was in the gang, all that stuff, but I had a crushing self-confidence thing, which I think goes back to a sense of shame from childhood, and I lost my confidence, and basically I had a social phobia, which meant then at university I had to go for counselling, I had to ask for help because of my desperation. And then throughout my life at different stages, I went for counselling as a probation officer. You know, I kind of had a breakdown at one point. I didn't realise it was at the time, but I think it was a breakdown, and I had more counselling. And eventually that helped me train as a counsellor and understand myself better. But it was all coming from brokenness. And so it was the humbling, not through choice, the humbling that gave me some sense of humility. And now Peter takes a mickey out of this, not in a bad way. I think he really likes this side, that he knows that whenever we need information or help in something, it's going to ask that person. So it comes more easily now. Helping others is this key thing for the helper as well. And that can be really healthy, it can be really good, but pride can come into that, as I say. And I recognised years ago that sometimes when you're good at helping people, you can get that kind of feeling of, oh, I don't need help, I'm the helper. And I had that a bit as a probation officer, and I had that in church at Upper Beeding. I was the young, rising minister and all that kind of thing. But again, I remember a particular time in the church where I was there feeling absolute rubbish. And nobody could see this, but I was on the verge of tears, and eventually I had to ask 2 or 3 friends to pray for me, and they took me out the back to pray for me. It was massive for me to actually ask for help, and I had tears, but I look back, that was a breakthrough. It was a humbling moment. I wouldn't have chosen it. I was humbled, not through choice, and it was a breakthrough, and helped me grow up a little bit more. As a probation officer and as a minister, I think through all of that, I've learned that you do not want people to become dependent on you. Sometimes people who help actually want people to become dependent on them, and that can become really unhealthy. And I have learned, and what I love to do, is actually empower people, try to empower people. You can do it. Have you thought about this? Asking questions rather than that unhealthy dependency. Sometimes it's actually through people getting into a habit of asking for help that there can be an unhealthiness, because they become dependent on other people or one particular person, where actually to build them up, to help them in the longer term, it's to help them realise that they have some of those resources themselves. Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. Tom Wright goes on to say, please listen to these words, "If I reckon I deserve to be favoured by God, not only do I declare that I don't need his grace, mercy and love, but I imply that those who don't deserve it shouldn't have it either." Tom Wright goes on to say, Jesus spent the whole of his life breaking through the cloud and bringing the fresh, healing sunshine of God's love to those in its shadow. Today's reading, the Pharisees, it looks like they were setting a trap for Jesus. Did you notice they were watching him carefully as he came to eat at the wealthy Pharisee's house? Very odd that there was somebody unwell who was also invited, because the Pharisees would not have naturally invited somebody they would see as unclean to eat with them. So there was something going on here. And we hear about this man with what is called an abnormal swelling. Today it might be diagnosed as an edema. There's excess fluids, sometimes linked to a heart problem. In those days, they would have thought this kind of swelling was linked to a sinful life. They are obviously eating and drinking and doing a lot of other things a bit too much, which is causing, so they would have been frowned upon and looked down upon. And then you see this sense of they shouldn't be helped on the Sabbath, law before people. Jesus has already tried to teach them about that with the woman who was bent over, and they were trying to trap him there. But Jesus makes the point time and time again that Sabbath was made for man and woman, not the other way around. So he noticed the man, he touched the man, he healed the man as he did that woman. Jesus, in his perception, also noticed at this dinner party the guests were picking the place of honour. And he tells a parable, basically saying, if you go to a wedding feast, if you go to a banquet, move down rather than up, because you risk otherwise being moved down by other people. And actually, if you're down, then maybe there's a chance of being moved up. Don't be humiliated and humble. Rather, you're more likely to be honoured and exalted. This is not a parable about dinner parties. This is not a parable about social etiquette. It's all about God's kingdom. How we are to be in the whole of our lives. And likewise, when he talks about inviting friends, relatives and neighbours to dinner, this is how God's kingdom should be. Because you might get a reward, you might get something in return. Do things, as Ant was touching upon, so hard where you might not get an immediate reward. People might not get to hear about how good you are and how generous you are and how helpful you are. Pride is so sneaky. Pride is ever so sneaky. It sneaks round the back. Just when you think you've conquered pride, you're proud. Just when you're pleased about your humility, you're proud. And false humility. People who wrestle with pride, whether they know it or not, often don't. It doesn't often come across as pride. It can be dressed up very well. Let's look at a few areas where pride might actually apply to us. Firstly, being too proud to ask for help. Can you ask for help? Have you always been able to ask for help? If not, why not? That's not a judgmental, if not, why not? If not, why do you think that is? Under what circumstances can you ask for help? Like the type 2 Enneagram, the helper, who find it so difficult. Sometimes they have to ask in a really roundabout way or expect you to notice their needs. Are you like that, just waiting for that help that never comes because you don't ask? Generally, some of the things that get in the way of asking for help is that, again, Anne touched on so much, wanting to be seen as capable. And the shame that society can attach to people who need help. Absolute rubbish. Shame about who you are, as though there is something faulty. It can be because we're so image conscious. We want to portray this false image to the world that I've got it all together. Who's got it all together? Really? Or the parental message. We've all got them. Some of them are really positive, some of them are in the middle, but some of them are harmful. They didn't mean to be, perhaps, but they are. You need to stand on your own 2 feet. You need to be independent. I've achieved everything on my own, so you should. Be a man. Be a proper woman. And as a Christian, this can be such a tricky, snaring thing as well. Because often as Christians, we also fear that we're less than. That maybe, as the Pharisees saw this man with an edema, that our misfortune has been caused by our sin. So I better not expose myself here, because maybe God is doing this to me because I've done something wrong. Rubbish. This kind of false thinking. Surely I should be having health and wealth now, and the sun should be shining on me 24/7, even though I live in England. Actually, that's not so relevant these days, but that false theology. And within church, it is so tempting to want to be seen as spiritual, to be the one who's got it all together, the one that people admire, the one who's seen as spiritually mature, the one who's seen as blessed by God. Again, the beauty in the pain of Ant's story. That concern about what other people think. That prison of image for all of us, stopping us asking for the help we need. Whether it be with groups, whether it be with counselling, whether it be with a spiritual director, whether it be with a minister. And the more basic things. Let's think about church. Could you ask for help from somebody in the church if you didn't understand your iPad or how to bake a banana bread or something? Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. And it might be blotting it for you and for me because we are not open for God's blessing and help through other people. Secondly, this pride in helping other people. Does that resonate with you at all? Does it resonate something else that Ant touched upon, helping somebody and getting a little bit of kick from doing that? And then the seduction of starting to help people from that unhealthy place from within. Helping in order to look good and to feel good. To be admired by other people as the helping person. I'm there to help others. Do you agree with this, or is it just me? An Ant. It's so hard to help people and to do something good and kind, to give financially, and nobody knows. I think we're often quite good at making sure it leaks in some way. Telling that person who you know is going to tell everybody. It's so hard to do something just before God. But it's so healthy and freeing to learn to do that. So many wealthy people, celebrities, give their money away, which is fantastic. But actually, I have a sneaky feeling that many do it and nobody knows. It's not made known through their publicist. I really admired that about George Michael. It was after he died that it came out just how much financial support and support in other ways he gave to so many people. Motivation for all of us is absolutely key. It's always mixed. It's always mixed. Because we're not Jesus. If we think we are, maybe we're really struggling with pride. But we can become more healthy through awareness, through not getting into that patronising thing, by seeing other people as the other who need help, and I'm not like that, I'm okay, thank you. Not creating dependency on ourselves with other people. Thirdly, what about taking pride in your appearance? It's okay to some extent, and as I was telling somebody in the shop the other day, I have lost any ability to buy myself clothes these days. I have to have advice from my adult children because otherwise I'll come back and they say, you can't wear that, Dad. It's okay to take some pride in your appearance. And we don't all have to be dour and monochrome. If we want to be, that's fine, but we don't have to be, as some of the old teaching in churches used to be. We're allowed to be different. But again, the Enneagram tool talks about all of us struggling with wanting to present an image, but in particular the type 3 personality, the achiever, who wants to be seen as successful. They have to portray an image. They often drive a certain car. I'm not going to say which one it is in case some of you have that car. They often drive a certain car. There's a real vanity there. It's a little bit like in our reading today, the people trying to get a place of honour, trying to look good in the eyes of other people. Generally, it can be unhealthy. I think Facebook and Instagram and the like are a prison because so many people, you know this, I know this, are portraying an image. I'm busy, I'm popular. Or doing it secondhand through their children. These are their results. Sometimes healthy, but not always from a healthy place. As a Christian, it can be really seductive, trying to maintain an image. But it is a prison, looking good, looking holy, looking nice, looking like the rule keeper. Oh, I do all these rules. I keep all these little laws. And that's why I'm blessed, actually. No, that's self-righteousness. I was remembering this morning, there was a lovely example. It was in my early days, but you tend to learn from other Christians what Christians should be like. And I think I got this phrase from somebody else, that's my excuse anyway. But I was preaching in Upper Beeding Baptist Church, and somebody came up to me and said something like, oh, that was a really good sermon, it really spoke to me. And my words were something like, it wasn't me, it was the Lord. And he said it wasn't that good. Not needing to look good. Again, so many people, instead of being set free within churches, find they're imprisoned because we put masks on and try and portray an image of somebody we're not. Fourthly and finally, pride before God. This is what this reading's all about, pride before God. It's about religious pride. And it said there's a connection, there's a correlation between those who try to promote themselves before other people, to look good before other people, in life, in church, and those who try to do that before God. It can be so tempting. Does this resonate with you? Pride in seeing yourself as God's people. We're God's people. Really? Isn't everybody a child of God? Our denomination, this church, really? And then seeing others as less than. Pride in seeing yourself and myself as deserving God's blessing, like the older brother in the story of the prodigal son, because of my faithfulness and my rule keeping. And people like this man with the edema, no, less than. He doesn't deserve God's blessing. Pride. This is getting to the heart of it, taking pride in our understanding of God's laws, of the Bible, you could say, which isn't all about God's laws, but that's how it can be read. And your ability to keep them. It can all be to do with privilege as well, as it was with the Pharisees, those who had the money and the time to study. And then you have the knowledge, and others are less than because they understand less. And then you can impose your understanding of the Bible on other people. I can slip into this as well because I don't relate to those who might be called conservative Christians. I used to, but I don't. I would relate with those more who call themselves progressives. And sometimes you can look down upon the other and think, what are they talking about? Whereas actually, not all progress is progress. Not everything that is new is good. And likewise, not everything that some people are trying to conserve is bad. It's about having humility. Just like the Jewish Christians in the early church, and this was being written up by Luke in the days of the early church, when the Jewish Christians were actually trying to impose lots of rule on the Gentile Christians. Sometimes we try to impose our rules, which actually are nothing to do with God, on other people. We try to stay at the top table. Pride, notoriously, is the great cloud which blots out the sun of God's generosity. If I reckon I deserve to be favoured by God, not only do I declare that I don't need his grace, mercy and love, but I imply that those who don't deserve it shouldn't have it. Jesus spent the whole of his life breaking through the cloud and bringing the fresh, healing sunshine of God's love to those in its shadow. So, what's the good news this morning? What is the answer? Possibly self-awareness. It's my hobby horse. I'm probably very proud about this hobby horse. But self-awareness amongst people is shocking. Self-awareness amongst Christians, I think, is shocking. And it goes alongside Christ awareness. Because then you can work out pure motivation, healthy motivation, and that which is coming from the ego. Becoming more like Christ, the one who didn't grasp equality with God, even though he was God and is God. I reckon part of the way forward for all of us is being open to God's help, because that requires humility. Not thinking that we're doing all this on our own. Asking for help from other people. And directly asking for help. Learning from each other within church. And learning from people who the Pharisees, the religious, might see as those who are less than. Because that's rubbish. Learning from the younger, learning from the older, learning from those with mental health issues, learning from so on and so on, rather than those who look very holy. I'll learn something from them as well. I love Richard Raw's phrase, falling upwards. Pride becomes before a fall, but it's through falling, I think, that we learn humility the most. I have learnt so much about humility here, not because I'm ever so humble, but because I have been humbled so much by the tough stuff in the early days and the pain. But actually that's what really got me going to God time and time again, and seeking help often from people outside of the church. How do I survive? What do I do? It wasn't through choosing humility, it was through being humbled. No choice. But what I have found is that gives you a beautiful freedom. Again, something Ant touched upon. Because you end up choosing to care less about your image. About what other people say about you. You focus more on things like integrity. I found freedom in asking for help. Because it's so good to get the right help from the right person. It's beautiful and freeing, priceless. And ultimately, all of it is about you and me and everyone knowing that we are loved by God. Our worth in God's eyes, priceless. We do not need to put up a false image to the world. We do not need to feel shame about who we are at core. Needing help doesn't mean you're faulty. It means you're human. We have been made for relationship with each other, not for unhealthy codependency, but for healthy interdependency. Helping each other at different stages. I'm helping you now, but you might help me, and so on. Very finally, a picture I saw which stayed with me on TVAM many years ago, wouldn't it? TVAM. And they were talking about lions being released into the wild. And they took this lion had been in captivity, out into the wild. They opened the cage. The lion went out, wandered around, and then came back into the cage again. It had become so used to its surroundings, to its ways. For all of us, this kind of growth, this kind of humbling, this kind of getting in touch with our virtues rather than our vices takes so long. So we need to be tender with ourselves and give each other time. But it is beautiful because it is better to live outside of the prison than be imprisoned by these kind of things we've touched upon. My prayer is that the fresh, healing sunshine of God's love blesses you and me today and over the days ahead. Amen. I invite you to stand, if you're able and you'd like to, or remain seated for the last song. Or bow down.